Hello and welcome to this week's Run with Radio 1045 Johnny blog. I'm Johnny here with a very, very special guest, Mark Sullivan, whose running resume just really blows me away. 178 marathons, is that the accurate total?
That is correct.
You've ran 33 consecutive Boston marathons.
That is
and
correct.
for those of you who aren't that aware, you have to run really fast just to run Boston once. So running 33 is impressive. And you've ran the AACR Philadelphia Marathon since it's officially become the Philadelphia Marathon 25 consecutive years.
That's right.
As a runner, I'm working on my fifth marathon this November. That just blows me away, 178 marathons. So I just quickly, what is your running journey? How did you start running to begin with?
I started because I was pretty sedentary with what I was doing with my work. I was an illustrator, so I was going cable all the time. Needed to get out. I had been into backpacking and rock climbing, things like that, but the problem was I could only get out on the weekends or once a month to do that. So I needed some kind of exercise. I thought running's the perfect idea, so I went out and started running, and that's what led me to eventually race and then go to marathons.
Were you fast right away? Because your marathon pace is generally below 3 hours, which for me is pretty amazing.
Had been for a while, but it's not right now. Yeah, I wouldn't say I was fast. I just went out and ran. I didn't know what I was doing. Like any newcomer to running, I would go out and make a lot of mistakes that you normally make. I went out, my first 5K I ever ran, which was the first race I officially ran, the day before I went out and ran as fast as I could for 3 miles to see how I could do, which makes no sense at all to run that fast the day before the race, but you make mistakes like that and you learn from them. Eventually you become more knowledgeable and do the right things and do the right kind of training.
And that's one of the big purposes why I started this blog, is because as a runner I'm always looking for new information, so I want to pass along what I know, but I also want to draw on great resources from people like you. So when you started running your first 5K, how long into running did it take you where you had the confidence to run a full marathon?
I wanted to run a full marathon probably within the first year of when I started running, but we had a lot on our plate at the time. We were just moving into our new home and a lot of other things, and we had to go to a wedding and some other things I was scheduled to run my first, and I said, it just doesn't make sense to me to do it then. I might as well just put it off. And I wasn't really that into it yet. I just thought I'll just give it a try. So the following year is when I trained in earnest for my first marathon. And there was a local fella who said, well, I want to run with you when you're training for your marathon, because I like to run, and he had run a couple marathons. And I said about making mistakes earlier, and that's what I did, a lot of mistakes in my first training for my first marathon. As you know, it takes time to build up. You get a couple long runs in. I'm a coach, and I recommend people run maybe 3 to 4 really long runs in preparation for the marathon. You'll be building up to those, but those would be the runs at the 18 to 22 mile range maybe. And when I did my first marathon, to show you by example and contrast, I did 11 20-milers not knowing, so I went out and ran, which was absurd. Every week I was running 20 miles or maybe squeezing 2 in within a week. And I just didn't know. I was just running them like crazy. So I wasn't really doing what I should have done at that point. But
and that definitely is a challenge. We'll get more into this a little bit, but I know just from my own training, I follow a plan, I run with a group, but sometimes I get a little overzealous. It's like, am I pushing it too much, or just trying to find that right balance? So you're training enough, but you don't start to get into overuse injury type stuff. So you ran 178 marathons over what span? How many years have you been running marathons?
Ran my first marathon in 1986.
Okay.
Yeah. When I first started off, my first marathon was the Harrisburg Marathon, and I qualified for Boston at my first marathon. And so I had no intention of running Boston. I just wanted to run another marathon the following year. And so that following spring, I was signed up for the Jim Thorpe Marathon, which was in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, the Jim Thorpe Army War Museum. I thought, okay, that sounds good. It'll be March. I can get ready for that. And sometime late in maybe February or something like that, it got canceled. They just pulled the rug out from underneath. And I said, I don't know what I'm going to do. And my mother said, well, you already qualified for Boston. Why don't you go run Boston? And at that time, it wasn't like it is now. I mean, you could actually get in because the field was smaller and they had late registration. So I also had to get a TAC number back then. I don't know if you've ever heard of that before. No. It used to be the Athletic Congress, and they used to you have to register with them to be an official runner, and then you got your TAC card for $10, and then you could sign up to be in the Boston Marathon. and they were able to get me in. They said, "Hey, you qualified, you'll get in." The first Boston had about 9,000 plus in it, between 9,000 and 10,000, and it was about a 1-to-9 ratio with women to men, which was very unusual because now you have, even in some of the races, more women than men running. So that's how it all started off, and I just kind of got in from that point and was going on a pattern where I would run one in the spring, one in the fall, as far as marathoning. And then eventually I realized I could run more than that because I had a propensity to recover pretty quickly. My wife, after the first couple years, decided she was going to run a marathon, and she had a very, very bad experience with the first marathon. Her feet blistered terribly and a lot of blood, and I said, don't take that as your first. I said, in fact, you're training, why don't we go to another marathon? So soon after that, we just jumped into a second marathon, and I was able to do that one without any trouble. I felt like I was trained and ready to go. So I got the idea that if I have the training in, I could do another marathon without having to retrain. And so that's kind of what led me to do so many marathons. I was able to build up like that. And it wasn't initially that I was doing so many. Initially it was just the one in the spring, one in the fall, like most marathoners would do. I was working my way up and eventually got to about, maybe 9 in a year. I would do something like that because I was able to recover and just do another one.
What is the shortest time span between marathons you've ever done?
6 days.
6 days, wow. Because I've heard of people who do consecutive marathons,
Yeah.
and it's like, 6 days just blows me away. For me, 1 a year is still good. So.
Yeah, well, I mean, it depends on what you're trying to go
Yeah.
for, too. It depends on your goal. A lot of it is how hard are you running. I mean, there's people who run a marathon every week. I mean, the marathon maniacs will do that. They'll run a marathon every single weekend. But some of them will admit, I'm not running that hard. I'm just going out for the fun of it and running one. And that makes sense. If you're running a lot easier, it's not as hard to go out and push yourself the entire time. If you're trying to qualify for Boston every one, or you're trying to run a personal best each time you're going out, you're going to definitely have to cut down on the numbers you're running. It just depends on what you're doing.
All right, so you're in Philly. You're brand ambassador for the AACR Philadelphia Marathon, and specifically this weekend for the all-city 10-miler and 20-miler. And if I understand correctly, you're involved with Students Run Philly.
I'm not officially.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm helping him
Okay.
with this
Oh,
personal race. Yeah.
And the mayor's going to be honoring you for all of your Philadelphia marathons.
That I don't know about.
That was what the press release said. so.
Okay. Yeah. Well, generally speaking, there's another fellow in addition to myself. There's 2 of us who
Oh, okay.
run all of them.
Okay.
And we've run every one of the Philadelphia marathons. His name's Bob Cohn. He's from New Jersey. And so generally, when we have the opening ceremonies, what they have at the press conference before the marathon, they usually have us there and introduce us as the only 2 people who have run all the Philadelphia marathons.
There's only 2 of you. Wow.
Yeah. I'm very surprised about that. Back at the 15th running, we were in Ottawa, and we ran into the women who were at the booth promoting the Philadelphia Marathon. And as we walked by, they said, "Oh, run the Philadelphia Marathon." And I said, "Oh, I will. I'll be back. I come there every year." And they said, "Have you been there every year?" I said, "I've been there every year." And they said, "Wait, have you been there every year?" And I said, "I've been there every year since." They said, "Okay, we want to get your information because we're looking for all the people who have done it." And I said to the woman that was at the table, I said, "Well, how many have so far?" Because I was thinking, it's a big race, you probably have 24 or so people. And she said, "Well, so far there's just you and another fellow." And I thought, oh, they mean that they're just here or whatever. And then they contacted me shortly thereafter, and they said, "Yeah, we're still interested in getting this number together." I said, "How many to now?" She said, "Well, there's still just 2 of you." And I said, "Well, you'll get more." She said, "You think?" I said, "Oh, I'm sure you'll have to get more than that." The race this size, I was really shocked. I still can't believe it. Every year rolls around, I think there's got to be more people than that. Now we have others who have run 23 or 20, but there's nobody else who's run all of them. It just shocked me that there weren't more.
Are you running this year also?
Yes, well, I am. I want to make sure, full disclosure, I am injured. I have been injured for the last 2.5 years, actually. Not a running injury. It wasn't caused by running, but I have had a lot of difficulty with it. So I've had to, the last marathons I've done, the Boston and Philly, I basically had to kind of walk as quick as I can and shuffle as quick as I can to get through them, just because I want to maintain the streak. Still working at it, still trying to do it, but I love the race and I want to come back as much as I can.
So with 25 Philly marathons, 33 Boston, that leaves over 100 marathons in other places. Have you traveled to, what are some of the interesting places that you've gone to run marathons?
I did a lot of repeats, and I had 20 Marine Corps marathons, for instance. But we did like to go to the races in Canada quite a few years back. When I was coming up on my 100th marathon, we met a man from Canada. His name is John Stanton, and he has a huge following in Canada. He owns the Running Room, which is a series of stores in Canada. There's 100-some running rooms. We don't really have something like this in the United States. All the running rooms in all the different locations in Canada are pretty much consistent. They sell the same things. They have the same programs going on. And it's really a nice thing. It's a great thing for the runners because they know if they're in Calgary and they're going to travel to, say, Toronto, they can go and get the same equipment that they want or the same gear there, for the same store. He also is quite an entrepreneur, but he's very benevolent in his funding because he does help with. We have the Run for the Cure and the Race for the Cure, or vice versa, Race for the Cure, Run for the Cure there. Anyway, he has a line of clothing that he gives $10 for every purchase directly for the Cure. So he does share the love, so to speak, in running. But we met him. I was coming up on my 100th running. We were in Canada running in the Rock and Roll Canada Marathon in Burlington, Ontario, and he introduced himself. We got to know him, and he said, "Hey," he said, "I hear you missed your run that was going to be supposed to be whatever the time, 96 or 97. I was going to be doing 98 at that time, I think it was." And he said, "Why don't you come out to Edmonton and run out there?" And so we went out to Edmonton, Alberta, and ran the race out there. And so that was as far west as we ever went. But I like running the races in Canada. We ran Burlington, Niagara there, and the favorite one was going to Ottawa Marathon. I really
When I think of Canada, I think of cooler, which I think of as being good marathon running weather.
Yes and no. We've been to Ottawa many times, and it's been very, very warm. It's held Memorial Day weekend, and so it's great for the U.S. runners because we get the day off, on the Monday after, and it's a long weekend. But they do a great job up there. They have a really good series of races, and so we like to go to that one.
All right. So we're approaching the Philadelphia Marathon right now with this weekend's 10 to 20 miler, where we're sort of peaking in our training. So for those of us running the full and for those running the half, what should we really be thinking about over the next several weeks as we head towards the marathon?
The main thing is to not try to make up for lost time. People get panicky and they think, I don't have enough training in. And so they try to throw a lot of extra training in at the last minute, and that's a big mistake. I always say, don't try to do it, don't try to fill in at the last minute, don't try to cram for your exam, so to speak, at the last minute. It's not going to work. And especially the closer you get to the race, the more you try that, the worse it usually, the worse effect it usually has. It's better to just go in a little undertrained rather than overtrained. Most runners feel they're undertrained, but they're actually overtrained. Usually they've done enough, and they don't realize that. And they feel like they have to get more in, and that urge to get those last runs in is what usually causes the problem.
Yeah, and I know from my standpoint, one of the big challenges is when the taper starts to take impact, when your miles start going from like doing a 20 miler, you're doing an 8 miler on a Saturday, and you just feel like, I barely ran.
Exactly.
So trying to get past that. So fast forward to the week of the marathon, thinking about things in terms of nutrition or other preparation tactics. What are the things that people should be thinking about most as they lead directly into the marathon at that point?
They really need to have a real taper plan as opposed to just winging it. Saying, I think I did enough today. The people that I coach, I have a 6-day plan generally that I do where you count down to the marathon. And I have them running a little bit of, I don't want to call it speed, but some faster stuff just to keep the legs active. And there's two days of complete rest in that 6-day program. There's 2 days where you kind of run active, and there's 2 very easy days. That one of them is the day before the marathon. I always recommend right the day before the marathon an easy 20-minute run. Just go out, a nice relaxing 20 minutes, stretch the legs out a little bit, work the legs, and then go out, you stretch, you go out for dinner afterwards, have a nice dinner, and get off your feet for the rest of the day and just relax and be ready for the race. Eat early on the day before. The other thing is the old school method was carbo loading. People used to talk about that. They used to have a carbo depletion run, they would call it. And they would say you go out a certain number of days before and you run as hard as you can and deplete yourself, but don't eat anything. And then you wait, and then you allow yourself to store more carbs. And they used to say, well, if you have a 5-gallon gas tank and you dump all the gas out of it, you still have a 5-gallon tank, you're only going to get 5 gallons back in. It doesn't really work that way. It does work to carbo load, though. And most runners are already eating a high carbohydrate diet. But you can kind of tweak that a little bit, especially in the last days. You might want to cut back a little more on fats and a little more on the proteins and go with a little more of the carbs. Runners tend to eat a pretty healthy diet with a good balance, and your body kind of tells you what you should and shouldn't be eating. So if you're out going for a long training run and you've been eating a lot of fried food, it doesn't work so well, and you kind of shift to the better foods. So in the last few days, it's very important to make sure you're getting a lot of high quality, that the complex carbohydrates are what you want. And the thing people have to remember is, if you're eating carbohydrates, carbohydrates convert to glycogen, but they only do so when you're drinking water. So every carbohydrate molecule needs a water molecule to bond to become glycogen that you store in your body. That's the fuel you run on, glycogen. Stored in your liver, you store quadricep muscles primarily. So the thing is to not just be eating the carbs, but to drinking plenty of water with it. And if you do that, you're probably doing as best you can to store up.
And the water is one of the things that I'm very conscious of also, because I think a lot of mistakes people make are trying to drink too much water too close to the event, where you should get in a good hydration pattern leading up. Otherwise, you'll just eliminate it all, and you eliminate a lot of the sodium that goes along with it too. So do you have a perfect, like, not I say perfect, but for you, the day before, do you have the same meal that you have every time leading up to the marathon?
I like to eat pasta generally speaking, but not.
Is there a specific pasta recipe that you enjoy, or a specific type of pasta, like a whole wheat pasta?
Well, I do like whole wheat pasta.
Okay.
I definitely like that, and I not a fatty sauce. I usually go with a tomato sauce, tomato-based sauce, as opposed to like a cream sauce, something like that. Lots of bread. I eat a lot of bread with it, and a lot of salad with it. Usually I have a lot of that, and then I wash down a lot of unsweetened iced tea. I like to drink a lot of tea. But other than that, we're traveling a lot, so we go to the races, and it's hard to be at the same place every time. So you don't know where you're going to wind up eating sometimes. I have certain restaurants in certain cities that I like to visit. We go there and eat whenever we can in advance, because we know we're going to get that meal, and it's good for us to do that. And consistency, just as consistency in your running is important, consistency in all aspects of marathon preparation are
I
important.
always say never try anything new on marathon day. Any other supplements? For example, I was or a year or two ago, I was turned on to beetroot extract juice. That I don't know if it's a placebo, but I feel like my performance has been better since I've been drinking that in the week or so before the marathon. You're sort of like nodding your head like I don't believe that?
No, it's not. I have no problem with that.
Okay.
Because certain things work for certain people. It doesn't work for everybody, and that's with everything. Everybody's body's chemistry is different. We know their diets are slightly different, so anything they're eating is going to interact differently with your body as opposed to anybody else's. But there's certain things, when you said, is there anything in particular, there's one of the things that I recommend that I always like to have. I switched quite a few years ago, fruit in the morning before the race. A lot of people have the old standby of a banana. But I had a lot of athletes I was coaching with, they wanted to eat a banana. I say, okay, be cautious, use it in training, because a lot of them would say, I was doing my long run and I was having some gastrointestinal problems. I said, were you eating bananas? They said, yeah. I said, maybe you need to get off the bananas. But they didn't want to switch because they felt the banana was the perfect thing. So I switched to a pear. Pears are really good. They have a very low glycemic index, and so what happens is they release their sugar very, very slow. And a nice sized pear can maybe take 4 hours to release its sugar, as opposed to where you're eating an orange or a banana or something that's going to kind of spike your sugar up. So you have a very slow release of that sugar, and I found something like that works very well for me. Many of the athletes I've coached, I've said, try the pear. Most of them swear by it. They say, I love it. It's great. It's so much liquid in there, so much juice, when they're eating it, so they feel like they're getting, even the water they need with it when they're eating. So that works very well for me.
That's actually great info, because I've been a banana person. This sounds sort of funny just talking about it. I've been a banana person, but yeah, maybe I'll try the pear for the 20 tomorrow. Now, Amber Miller, who I work with, who is running the half, she met you at one of the training runs a few weeks ago, and she said you mentioned morning of you eat a red and white candy, like a peppermint or something.
That's a little secret I have. Actually, I eat a big breakfast, and there was people laughed about that because I've been interviewed before, and they said, "What do you eat?" And I start going through the list, and they say, "Yeah, it's about 1,000 calories race morning," and they'll say 1,000 calories. I can't imagine. I eat a lot anyways. I'm always eating, big meals, and I'm used to doing that. So I don't recommend somebody gorge themselves race morning if they're not used to eating that way. But I usually, when I'm able to, I would have like a bowl of cereal with skim milk, and I would have a piece of fruit, and maybe a bagel, and possibly even a muffin with it, and a cup of fat-free yogurt, and then something else to wash it down. And the mint trick I was talking about is something else. I said, this is something I found a while back. I noticed that, and this happens in all races, and you'll be able to attest to it, especially in the shorter races. The gun goes off, and you're only a few minutes into it, and you can't quite settle into pace. You're feeling nervous, and there's people going by you, and you're like, should I be running as fast as that person? And you find yourself just kind of falling apart. Everything just goes, and it's like you have a race plan. Why is this such a problem? And I said the problem is that your blood sugar is diving. As soon as you start taking off, your blood sugar is taking a dive. And there is a response, there's like a sympathetic response to your nervous system that happens, and you start getting nervous, and I'm not running fast enough, and you start to panic. And so what happens is, if you can get that blood sugar back up, you can kind of go through that. It happens to most people maybe anywhere from 3 to 8 minutes in a race, something like that. The first, especially notice it in the 5Ks, you'll see that happen. But it happens in the marathon, especially because your nerves are, on edge when you start. So I recommended taking a little mint, and there's little, the red and white mints you mentioned that you see in restaurants when you're leaving, that kind of thing. I said, take one along and pop it in your mouth just before the start. And there's, for multiple reasons. One, it moistens your mouth, and a lot of times you're getting a little nervous, your mouth is drying out, and you want to be drinking the water because you're going to have to go to the bathroom. So you put the mint in your mouth, it keeps your mouth moist. It also freshens your breath, and sometimes when you're nervous, your breath feels a little stale. And the peppermint helps to open up. It opens up your sinuses, and you breathe in, and it seems to aerate, the whole interior of your respiratory system. It just gets that open and breathing real well. But that little bit of sugar that you get gives you a sugar spike. It only lasts for a few minutes. But what happens is it gets you past that nervous part. And peppermint is calming to the system. And so that one little mint can work like a miracle, because I had a particular woman I was coaching who had real problems with nerves in the beginning, and I got her on the peppermints, and she thinks it's like a magic pill now. She takes the peppermint before, she's great. She runs the race. She says, I don't have that nervousness at the beginning those first few minutes when I'd be nervous and not knowing what to do, and running too fast, running too slow, trying to yo-yo to get back on pace. She said, I just pop the mint and I'm good.
It's interesting you bring up nerves, because that is a phenomenon that I think people who don't run those races may not say, why are you nervous? But I know when I get there, it's like it's just there's a certain amount of anxiety with that. And leads me to my next question. You talk about a race plan, and some of the anxiety is, for this year I feel pretty comfortable with my training. I feel like I'm doing well, and I'd like to PR this year. Last year I didn't feel great with my training, and I thought I was going to PR until I had started with the 440 group. My fastest has been about 443. So I started with the 440 group, and then I got into Manayunk, which is around 20 miles, and I was starting to fade. But then I saw the 440 pace group, which I started with, they passed me. I'm like, oh, I can still do 440. So I started running with them for a mile or two, and it was too much for me at that point. I had to walk for a half a mile and then just sort of hobble for the next few miles. So I guess, what would you say to me, in terms of how I manage my pace if I want to break 440? Do I just run with the 440 group the whole time? They do a steady pace, or do I start slower and then work my way up and then assume I'm going to get slower? I mean, do you have any thoughts on what the best strategy is?
I have what I could consider to be the best general strategy, but referring back to what you were talking about, you can answer your own question. You said you weren't completely confident of your training, you weren't sure you were going to be, and you were going to go with the 440 group, but you did run the 440, and they were behind you. So what happened? That means you outran them. You ran faster than you should have, or too early on. So you answer your own question there, saying you did something you probably shouldn't have done. Nerves got the better of you, and you decided to go a little faster.
I just felt good.
Yeah, and that's what happens. And I make an analogy, and I always tell people, don't go out too fast. And people used to always say, I want to bank a little time, and I do it, and I'll say, it doesn't work that way. It comes back on you. And I always make a joke about that when I'm doing these seminars. I say that, 2 years of banking analogy, I said, you don't want to be banking time ahead of time, because there's a substantial penalty for early withdrawal. When you start taking away, you're going to pay later on. You're going to pay some kind of interest on what you took out early, and it does happen. It comes back. Well, if you're running, say, a minute too fast per mile in the early stages, you could be running 2 minutes too slow. At the end stage, it just works that way. There's a ratio of some sort that takes over. But the best race strategy I always recommend is to divide the race into thirds. And what happens? Most people who come to the race, they're very, very fit, and the first, say, 6 to 8 miles should feel easy. And the problem is, because it feels so easy, that's when they say, I'm going to bank some time, I'm going to run fast, I'm going to go out really, get myself ahead. And that's the biggest mistake you can make. You really need to be conservative and hold back. It's kind of like revving your engine on your car. If you're just sitting at a red light and hitting that gas pedal, you're just burning up gasoline that you're going to need to use later, and you're going to run out of gas. So if you go out at a very conservative pace for the first third of the race, and you can go a little bit less or a little bit more, depending on what works for you, but you run what feels too slow. And people are going to go by you, and you're going to say, oh, that person should be passing me, that shouldn't be. But they're going to be coming back later on, and you have to understand that. You have to stick to your plan. The middle third, then, the next third, should feel about right. You settle into your pace, you're comfortable then, and you're just running what feels right. And then you save the final third for your race. That's when you actually dig down and you start really pushing yourself. Now, in the marathon, you can also shift it a little bit, maybe go a little longer for that middle third, and then really push over the last 10K. That really works pretty well. A lot of people, mentally, when they hit 20 miles, they say, I'm going to race the last 10K. It's an easy way mentally. But you really need to do it that way. And what happens is most people who make the mistake kind of run the exact opposite. They're going out too fast for the first third. They're running in the middle for third and fine, and then the final third is a mess. You know, they're falling apart. They're walking. They're just struggling to get in. And so I say, if you can run it the right way, that way you'll be passing everybody over the final third of the race and feeling really good and can finish strong, and you do really well that way.
Awesome. I think that's a great thought. And before we start to wrap it up, just going back to running your first marathon, and you know, the people that I try and appeal to with my blog are not only people who are training for a marathon, people who are training for a half, but people who are at the 5K level, 10K level, who are overwhelmed at the concept of running a marathon. And I see people even at the half marathon level who are overwhelmed by that. Do you have any thoughts on that, and just inspiration, motivation that they can do it? Because I know they can, because I know I can, but I mean, what are your thoughts on, you know, advice for those people?
Yeah, I understand that concept. Everybody says to me, "Oh, you've run that many marathons," and they think of you as like it wasn't for you. It wasn't the same as it is for them. Well, if you did that many marathons, obviously it is the same. That's the whole point. Anybody who's running a marathon has to run 26.2 miles. It's the same thing. And I didn't run all those marathons at once. You know, it's the old adage about how to eat an elephant. It's one bite at a time. You know, and running a marathon is eating an elephant. You're taking one step at a time. You're taking one bite at a time. And so you have to think it in terms of how you're going to build up, you know, get yourself to a point where you're able to run longer and longer and longer, and eventually run the distance. And I mean, I have people that I've coached, and there's a woman that's running this year who's going to be running in Philly, and her longest race ever had been a half marathon. She couldn't fathom the concept. She recently completed a 22-mile run, and I got an email from her yesterday saying, "I can't believe how strong I am. I can't believe I can do this, and I'm feeling so good." And all of her confidence is there. Once you start to do it, once you start to build up, your confidence builds. And so if you're running a 5K, you're going to say, "I can't possibly run that far." But once you run 5 miles, and then you increase again, and eventually you run a 10-mile run, and you'll find yourself saying, "Gee, I could do that. I can go a little bit further." And it's just a matter of going a little further each time, extending that distance. It takes time. Everybody has to do the same thing, but it's worth the try. I mean, people who say, "I can't do it, there's no way I can do it," they should try it. They really could. One of the other things they can consider, if the distance is a problem, is to consider a run-walk program. And those are really popular in some areas. Canada does a lot of them, but I know that I've recommended it to a lot of people, where they take 10-minute increments, and they run for 9 minutes and then walk for a minute. And they do that the entire race. And what happens is, if they do that in training, they'll find themselves being able to bump up their mileage so much easier. And for several reasons. When you have the 1-minute recovery, it helps to, you know, dissipate the lactic acid that's building up. You change up your musculature, your legs feel better during that 1 minute. But it also gives you a mental break. And you know how it is if you're coming to a water station. I'm going to walk the water station yesterday. You know, just that idea of I can stop and get a drink, it makes you feel better. And so when they do the 9 and 1s, for instance, they feel like they have that little bit of a break, and they feel they can get on to the next 9. I only have to go 9 minutes, and I get another 1-minute break. 9 minutes, 1-minute break. And that is really taking that bite each time, you know, to eventually eat the elephant. You have to take it in steps, and that's a good way to take it in steps, both in your training and for the marathon. You can get through it, and usually the people who do that finish the marathon much stronger and feeling much better. Their quads aren't trash, they don't feel bad overall, and oftentimes they run faster than they would have if they run continuously the whole time, because they maintain a steady pace the entire time, as opposed to dropping off, you know, as they get tired later on.
Okay. And before we go, you mentioned coaching. I know you have a website. If people want to explore your vast knowledge of running even further within all the information you've shared here, how can they track you down?
The website is iRunICoach.com, yeah. And they could just look me up there. We've got an email on there they can click and get a hold of me.
And along with your coaching services, just, I mean, the website itself just has a vast array of information for so many components of preparing for a marathon and training. So
tips, yeah.
Anything you'd like to add before Tricia shuts off the camera?
I just would encourage people to run the Philadelphia Marathon. It's a great race. I recommend it to a lot of people. It's a great first-timers race because there's great support, but it's a great race for anybody for a number of reasons. But Philadelphia does things right, and I highly recommend the marathon.
All right, thank you, Mark Sullivan.